So they say that it can only be shirk when that action is accompanied with a belief that he is a Rabb, or he has aspects of ar-rububiyyah. And we know in the Quran, and it's clear in the Quran, that istighatha, seeking rescue and seeking help, and dua, that this action is an act of ibadah. And that's why Allah subhanahu, He mentions in the Quran, the meaning of which is, and verily your Lord says, ud'uni, invoke me and call upon me, and I shall answer you. Verily those people who turn away from my ibadah will enter into the fire. Notice how Allah subhanahu exchanged the word of dua with al-ibadah in the same ayah. And this is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah. That dua, it is ibadah. But these people, they are saying no, dua is not ibadah. And your action of making dua to other than Allah, it is not ibadah, unless you believe that the one who you are making dua to, he is your Rabb, or he has aspects of ar-rububiyyah. So we will say to that person that your actions are haram and you should not do such actions because they resemble the actions of the Quraysh. So the first evidence from the Quran, which is very direct in judging the action of ibadah to other than Allah as being shirk, even if it is without an aqidah, without an intention, is the ayah in Surah Al-An'am. And in this ayah, Allah subhanahu, He mentions 18 of the greatest rusul, of the greatest messengers. Amongst them Ibrahim and Ishaq and Yaqub and Nuh and Dawood and the other great messengers which were sent. So Allah subhanahu mentions these great messengers, and they are a'immatul rusul. They were the most major and senior amongst the messengers, and they were the best of the creation of Allah. And then Allah subhanahu mentions that which He favored them with in terms of prophethood and risala and guidance. And then after all of this, then Allah subhanahu mentions, and if they were to commit an act of shirk, لَحَبِطَ عَنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, then their actions would be lost and invalid. If they were to commit an act of shirk, if they were to do shirk, then their actions would be invalid. So contemplate and think, oh my brother, the warning that Allah subhanahu gave to 18 of His messengers. And these were messengers who were chosen by Him, and they were the best of creation. And yet He gave them the warning that the act of shirk, without mentioning any condition of al-i'tiqad and intention, that this is sufficient in actions being invalidated. Of course, those people who bring the doubts, they say that it's not possible for a Muslim to do an act of shirk and he has this aqidah, because no Muslim believes that there is a Rabb besides Allah. And as long as you don't believe that there is a Rabb besides Allah, that action is haram. However, we do not commit it, we do not say it is shirk. So a person can make istighatha, and he can exalt the people in the graves through sujood and slaughtering animals and making vows, but he has with him a protection. And that protection is, as long as you don't believe the one in the grave is your Rabb, or has attributes of ar-rububiyyah, then you are protected from falling into shirk. But in the Quran we find that Allah subhanahu, He rules upon the action, and He gives this warning to the messengers. So if this warning is given to the messengers, then how about us as Muslims? So we find in the Quran, in this clear direct ayah, that Allah subhanahu judges the action to be shirk without mentioning any external condition of a niyyah, or a person taking the one who is worshipping to be a Rabb besides Allah. In the second ayah, Surah Al-Zumar, ayah number 65, in which Allah subhanahu addresses the final prophet, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And He says to our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, verily it has been revealed to you and to those who came before you, la in ashrakta, if you perform shirk, if you commit an action of a shirk, your actions will be lost and invalid, and you will be from the losers. So consider the warning that Allah subhanahu gave to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he warned him against the action of a shirk. So here in this ayah, the warning is not that if you believe others besides me have aspects of a rububiyyah, if you believe that there is a Rabb besides me. Rather, the warning is la in ashrakta. And this is clear that it is referring to the action of a shirk. Aware of the 7 major destructive sins, which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in the hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned the actions. So for example, he mentioned in that hadith a shirk, and he mentioned a sihr, and he mentioned al-qatl, and he mentioned consuming the wealth of the orphans, and he mentioned a zina, etc. So the one who kills another, who does the action of killing, what do we call that person? A qatil, a murderer. And a person who does the action of a sihr, that person is called a sahir. And the one who consumes or the one who deals in riba, in interest, we call that person murabi. He is given the name and the term murabi. The one who commits the action of shirk, what do we call that person? That person is called a mushrik, etc. And the hadith does not talk about intentions, and the hadith does not talk about i'tiqad. Rather, the person is held accountable and judged according to his actions. Of course, we all know that a person has to have intellect, he has to be sane. So the one who is majnoon is not held accountable, and the person is aware of that which he is doing. So if, for example, a person drank alcohol thinking it was halal, he did not know that this was alcohol, he is not held accountable. Then the second answer to this is that the Quran is very clear and very explicit that the mushrikun of Mecca, they used to direct acts of ibadah to those idols without ever claiming that those idols have any aspect of ar-rububiyyah. Rather, they would affirm that rububiyyah is the exclusive quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, Surah Yunus, and the ayah is number 31 and 32, Allah subhanahu says, "Say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, to them, who sustains you and gives you rizq from the heavens and the earth, and who is the one who has control of hearing and sight, and who brings out who gives life to the dead and brings death to the living, and who controls the command and the affair. فَسَيَقُولُونَ Allah." They, the mushrikun of Quraysh, they will say, "It is Allah." Say to them, "Do you not fear Him?" And then the ayah continues, "So that is Allah, your Lord of truth, and what is after truth except falsehood. And so, فَأَنَّا تُصْرَفُونَ." So consider the actions which you are doing. Meaning, why do you do these actions whilst you affirm that Allah is the Rabb? Whilst you affirm that hearing and sight and life and death and control is with Allah subhanahu. Whilst you affirm and you believe in His rububiyyah, and yet you act in this way, that you direct actions of ibadah to other than Allah. And Imam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah, he understood this ayah with the correct understanding, according to the understanding of the ulama and the scholars of at-tafsir from the various groups and the various madhahib. The scholars of at-tafsir, they understood this ayah explicitly. And so we will not mention the statements of the ulama of Ahl Sunnah. Rather, we will mention statements from the scholars of Ahlul Kalam, the people of rhetoric, and what they said regarding this ayah or its understanding. So we will mention the understanding of Fakhruddin al-Razi, and of course he was from the well-known Mufassirun from Ahlul Kalam, and he was from the Asha'ira, and he came well before Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and also before Ibn Taymiyyah, because he died 606 Hijri. So he said regarding the ayah in Surah Yunus that this ayah shows that those who were addressed with this speech, i.e. the mushrikun of Quraysh, they knew Allah and they affirmed the attributes of Allah, meaning they affirmed the rububiyyah of Allah, and they were the ones who said regarding their ibadah, meaning they justified their ibadah towards the idols, that we are only worshipping them because they take us close to Allah, and they are our shufa'a, they are our interceders to Allah. And one of the other excuses they would mention that this is taqleed. We are following the way our forefathers, and we will mention this later. And Al-Razi, he continues, he says, they knew, meaning the mushrikun of Quraysh, they knew that the asnam, the deities and the idols, la tanfa' wa la tadar, they do not benefit, neither do they harm. And this is why Allah then ordered the Prophet ﷺ to say to them, فَقُلْ أَفَلَا تَتَّقُونَ, meaning, why do you not fear Him? If you accept and you affirm the rububiyyah of Allah, then why is it you are making these awthan as partners to Allah fil ma'budiyya, in your actions of shirk? And you affirm and you know that all goodness, kullul khairat, all goodness in the dunya and the akhirah, it is only attained by the mercy of Allah and His goodness. And you know and you affirm that these awthan, these idols, they do not benefit, neither do they harm, al-batta, absolutely. And notice how Al-Razi, he mentioned this word al-batta, meaning he did not say that these idols, they do not benefit or do they not harm. Meaning maybe sometimes every now and again there may be some benefit, some blessings. Rather he said absolutely. You know that there is no way that these idols have any aspect of a rububiyyah, absolutely. Whereas those who bring the doubts, they will say that you have to believe the one who you are directing the act of worship to has a rububiyyah, or has aspects of a rububiyyah. Whereas even Al-Razi is saying that Allah is telling them, the idol worshippers, that you believe the idol who you are worshipping have no right or no aspect of a rububiyyah at all. And then also an important ayah regarding this is the ayah in Surah Al-Shu'ara, number 72 to 74, in which the discussion between Prophet Ibrahim a.s. is mentioned with his people who are committing acts of shirk. And he said to them, the meaning of which is that these idols who you are directing acts of worship to, do they hear you when you invoke them? And can they benefit you, or do they harm you? Meaning Ibrahim a.s., he asked them about these three specific traits. Can they hear? Can they benefit? And can they harm? And what was the answer from the people? They said, rather we found our forefathers doing these actions. Sirun, they clarified the meaning of this ayah. As Ibn Kathir and others said, Ibn Kathir said regarding this ayah, that the mushrikun at the time of Ibrahim a.s., they accepted that their idols do not possess any of these attributes, meaning of hearing and benefiting and harming. Rather, they only did these actions because they inherited it from their forefathers who would do these actions. So this is very clear that the reason why they were doing this shirk was not because of a philosophy or an ideology or an aqidah in their hearts, but it was shirk al-taqleed. It was what their forefathers were doing. And the action was shirk. Of course, the likes of Yasir Qadi and Hatim al-Auni, this ayah, it completely invalidates their arguments. So how does Hatim al-Auni reply? He says that this understanding of the ayah by these mufassirin, or some of the mufassirun, this is incorrect. The correct meaning of the ayah is that Ibrahim alayhi salam asked them, do these idols hear you when you invoke them? And do they harm you? And do they benefit you? Do they harm you? They said, yes, they do, because we found our forefathers doing this action. And I mean, Shaykh is talking about himself, I researched over 100 different books of tafsir, 100 different books of tafsir, from the time of the Salaf until our time today, from the modern books of tafsir. And I did not find a single book of tafsir which mentions this understanding. In fact, all of the books of tafsir and all of the ulama, regardless of the madhahib, all of them agree with the understanding which was mentioned by Ibn Kathir. Yasir Qadi and his likes, the reason why they refused to accept the explicit rulings of the ayat and the Quran in that which we have mentioned is, as he mentions himself, he studied history of paganism and idol worship, and especially the paganism with the Greeks and the Romans. And then he took this and he applied it to that which the Arabs were doing. So the Greeks and the Romans, they believed that the smaller gods did have aspects of rububiyyah. And therefore, if they believed it, and the Romans believed it, and the Indians believed it, therefore the Arabs must have also believed it. So he negated and he went against the teachings of the ayat of the Quran based upon the philosophies of the Romans and the Greeks and the Indians, etc. And of course, this is an error from various angles. Firstly, we say that which the Greeks and the Romans and the Indians were doing, this was one type of shirk rule. However, this is not the only type of shirk. Rather, there are other types of shirk. And the Quran is very clear and very explicit that there are other types of shirk. So for example, we know that there is shirk with the belief of gods besides Allah. And there is shirk with the belief of the idols having some aspects of rububiyyah. And there is also shirk, the action of shirk without believing the deity or the idol or the god has any aspects of rububiyyah. And this is what the Quran is explicit about and very direct about. So why have you taken the philosophies of the Greek and the Romans and applied it to the mushrikun amongst the Arabs and negated that which the Quran is clear about, that they would do actions of shirk without ever believing that the idols have any aspects of rububiyyah.
Allahu allazi la ilaha illa huwa ar-Rahman